Sup, dude? Since 2021, the Trailblazers have won just a little over 30% of their games, going a horrendous 89-183. But believe it or not, once upon a time in an era where Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden blasted in every dude's Walkman, the Trailblazers were among the NBA's finest. A big reason for this was, instead of Anthony Simons, aka Brandon Ingram's baby mama's boyfriend, running the show, it was Clyde the Glide. Drexler was the second best shooting guard in the league behind only Michael Jordan. His ability to float through the air and get buckets had Portland battling for the title from 1990 to 92. Unfortunately, during that span, they lost in the conference finals once and in the finals twice, falling short of capturing a championship. Because of this, the front office decided they needed to rebuild, which meant their 32-year-old future Hall of Famer had to go bye-bye. The Glide wasn't about to go out sad. He wanted to win a ring, and by that point, his knees were practically shot. So in 1995, he requested a trade, and it was granted. They sent the old fart to the reigning champ Rockets, where he joined fellow Phi Slamma Jamma brother Hakeem Olajuwon. With the dream to ease Drexler's burden, just a few months later, they won the finals and Clyde killed, averaging 20 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists through 22 playoff games. Meanwhile, the organization he spent over a decade with was in shambles. The Trailblazers became one-pump chumps from 1993 to 98, making the playoffs every season but never lasting long. They essentially acted as a doormat each year, getting walked over in the first round for 6 consecutive years. But they took it like Scott Sterling, and after years of agony, by 1999 they were miraculously ready to contend again. A lot of that credit goes to Portland's GM Bob Whitsitt, the man who put all the goobers together. However, patience wasn't necessarily one of Bob's virtues. He wanted a good basketball team and he wanted it as fast as possible. This desire earned him the nickname Trader Bob. If he saw a move that added talent, he was making it. Chemistry and egos be damned. He didn't care if a player fit in a system or if they got along with their teammates. All Whitsitt cared about was talent. He took over right as the Blazers' championship window had slammed shut in '94. The team needed a new identity and Whitsitt was gonna build it. The first major pieces came in '96 when Bob started things off by trading for Rasheed Wallace. Rasheed was a 22-year-old hot-headed freak of nature, a 6'10" big man with post moves, a sweet jumper, aggression, and defensive versatility. He could cook and clamp up, but he was like Draymond Green when it came to emotions. On the all-time ejections list, dude sits at the top with 29. But Bob didn't care about his temper, he only cared about talent, and Sheed had a shit ton of it. Whitsitt also brought in Isaiah Ryder, a walking bucket who could score 20 points a night in his sleep. He was flashy, strong, and exciting to watch, but he had a reputation for being difficult. Off the court, he was starting to rack up headlines for all the wrong reasons. In Minnesota, he was fined repeatedly for showing up late to practices, team flights, and even games. There was also one time where he skipped an entire practice because he couldn't find his car keys. But he wasn't just bad with time, he also enjoyed chiefing that strong and kicking women. In 1996, he was arrested for marijuana possession and pled guilty to assaulting a woman in a mall, earning a suspension from the NBA. However, Bob shrugged it off. Talent first, everything else after. To bolster the backcourt, in free agency, he signed Kenny Anderson. Anderson was one of the most talented point guards of the 90s, a lefty with elite handles, great vision, and ability to push the pace with grace. The 26-year-old had just finished up the season averaging 15 points and 7 assists. On paper, he gave the team exactly what they needed, a legit floor general who could organize all the talent that had been thrown together. But while Anderson's game was smooth, his personality was a bit prickly. He was known to clash with coaches, and while he wasn't a headline magnet like Ryder, there were always whispers about his attitude and focus. Still, Bob didn't care. Anderson could ball and that was enough. Lastly, Portland had acquired the 7'3" Lithuanian giant Arvydas Sabonis, who they drafted 10 years prior, but years of injuries and Soviet politics had delayed his NBA arrival. If he was treated with care and stayed healthy, he could have been the greatest player ever. But unfortunately, the Soviet Union didn't give him a break, running him into the ground. By the time Portland got him, he was 30 and a shell of his former self. He was no longer the athletic marvel he'd been in the 80s. His knees were destroyed. However, he was still a monstrous force down low, his basketball IQ was off the charts, and he could rebound, shoot, and pass like very few big men could. Even on shaky knees, the big fuck gave the Blazers finesse and size to help battle their mortal enemy Shaq. With those dudes, Portland racked up 46 wins, then lost to the Lakers in the first round. Sabonis, though still effective on offense, struggled to contain Shaq, who turned the paint into his personal playground. That wasn't great, but something was brewing in Portland. By 1998, they decided to switch things up in the point guard department, trading Kenny Anderson to the Toronto Raptors in exchange for the Mighty Mouse Damon Stoudamire. Stoudamire was the 1996 Rookie of the Year and a tiny, quick, fearless point guard with handles, vision, and a knack for creating his own shot. He was the kind of general Portland needed, but he also had a love for the Zaza, and that started getting himself into trouble. Fun fact, I went to high school with his son. I had never spoken to the dude, but one time I somehow ended up smoking a joint with him. Anywho, by the time the 1998-99 lockout shortened season rolled around, Trader Bob's strategy was starting to pay dividends. The Blazers went 35-15 15, good enough for the second seed in the Western Conference. It was a dramatic turnaround for a team that had been considered mid or even ass for the last 6 years. In the opening round of the 99 playoffs, they went up against the Phoenix Suns, a team led by Jason Kidd and a young Tommy Googs. The Blazers wasted no time making a statement, sweeping the Suns 3-zip. Rasheed Wallace was a force on both ends of the court, Stoudamire orchestrated the offense beautifully, and Arvydas Sabonis reminded everyone that even as a cripple, the dude could still ball. After that came the Utah Jazz, a team that was fresh off winning back-to-back NBA Finals. The Kid Diddler and John Stockton were still a deadly duo, but Portland had momentum on their side, and Rasheed Wallace. He delivered several standout performances, and with the help of the Blazers' depth, they wore Utah down. The Blazers shocked the Jazz in 6 games, punching their ticket to the Western Conference Finals for the first time since 1992. But then the Spurs happened. Led by the twin towers of Tim Duncan and David Robinson, San Antonio was an impenetrable defensive fortress. Duncan, in just his second year, was already playing like a seasoned vet, while Robinson anchored the paint with his trademark mix of athleticism and intelligence. The Blazers tried, but it wasn't close. They got their cheeks clapped, losing 4-0 in humiliating fashion. Rasheed struggled against Duncan's D, and Sabonis was overwhelmed by Robinson's athleticism. San Antonio was just too good, and the Blazers, despite all their talent, weren't ready to conquer the beast. In order to reach that level, Trader Bob set on an all-out arms race to compete with the NBA's elite. His first target was Scottie Pippen. Fresh off a tumultuous stint in Houston, Pippen was still one of the most versatile and experienced players in the league. Bob acquired him through a trade along with 20-point-per-game scorer Steve Smith, further bolstering an already stacked lineup. With tons of firepower at their disposal, the Blazers steamrolled their way to the Western Conference Finals in 2000, setting up a high-stakes rematch against their biggest rivals, the Lakers. This time, though, the Blazers were seen as one of the few teams that could legitimately take down Shaq and Kobe's budding dynasty. The series ended up being as physical and intense as anyone expected. In games 1 and 2, they traded wins, but then LA took control, winning the next 2, seizing a 3-1 lead. It looked to be almost over, but then Portland stormed back and miraculously pulled a Game 7 out of their ass. This was the Blazers' chance to rewrite their story, to prove that they weren't a trash organization, and through 3 quarters they did just that, coming out firing and executing on both ends of the floor. Rasheed Wallace was cooking in the post, knocking down jumpers and dominating with his defense. Steve Smith hit timely shots, and even Damon Stoudamire, often criticized for his inconsistencies, played with composure. Then on defense, Sabonis used every ounce of his war-torn body and basketball IQ to outmaneuver Shaq, keeping the big fella relatively contained early on. The Blazers built a 15-point lead at the start of the 4th quarter, and the Staples Center crowd was stunned. It felt like the momentum had fully shifted toward Portland, and the Blazers were on the verge of making it to the finals. But then it happened, the infamous meltdown. In the 4th quarter, the Blazers decided their game plan would be to shoot but miss and then just play really bad. They went ice cold, missing 13 consecutive shots at one point. Their offense, so fluid and dynamic through the first 3 quarters, suddenly turned into a circle jerk. Rasheed Wallace, who had carried the team for much of the game, couldn't find his rhythm. Steve Smith went cold, and Scottie and Arvydas both fouled out. Meanwhile, the Lakers capitalized on every opportunity. Kobe Bryant, just 21 years old but already playing with the poise of a seasoned veteran, took over. He sliced through the Blazers defense, hitting pull-up jumpers and setting up his dudes with pinpoint passes. And then there was Shaq, who turned into an unstoppable force. Every time he got the ball in the paint, it felt like the entire arena knew what was coming, a thunderous dunk or a girthy layup. The defining moment came late in the quarter. With the Lakers now in control, Kobe drove into the lane, drawing in the defense and lobbed the ball perfectly to Shaq, who threw down a massive alley-oop. The play sent the crowd into a frenzy and became one of the most iconic moments in NBA history. The Blazers had looked like they were world beaters for 3 quarters, but were now just demoralized. Their 15-point lead had evaporated, and the Lakers outscored them 31-13 in the 4th, completing one of the greatest comebacks in playoff history. Final score 89-84, Lakers. This is where everything went south for Portland. Their descent into chaos was swift. By 2001, the first major scandal hit when Shawn Kemp, the 300-pound version of his former All-Star self, left the team to check into rehab for abusing coke. And later that year, their first-round pick, Zach Randolph, got cited for underage drinking in his hometown. While seemingly minor, it was a sign of immaturity that would soon snowball into more serious issues. The problems weren't just off the court either. The team's cornerstone, Rasheed Wallace, was leading the league not in scoring or rebounds, but in technical fouls. Wallace averaged like 30 techs per season during his prime, and his record-setting 41 techs in 2001 still stands today. That's a tech every other game. Also, that November, Wallace and Stoudamire were pulled over by police while driving home from a game in Seattle. They had weed on them, but they got the genius idea to tell the cops they smoked it all. That for some reason didn't work, and eventually the piggies found their stash, resulting in misdemeanor charges. The two avoided jail time by agreeing to attend drug counseling, but it still further damaged Portland's image. To make it worse, Stoudamire did not learn his lesson. He got arrested again in 2003 after trying to sneak 1.5 2.5 ounces of the devil's lettuce through an airport metal detector. Luckily, he didn't do any time, but he still had to pay a hefty $250,000 fine, and Portland suspended him for 3 months. That same year, Rasheed Wallace managed to one-up himself with a now infamous incident involving referee Tim Donaghy. After a heated game at the Rose Garden, Wallace confronted Donaghy in the loading dock area and threatened him. The NBA responded by suspending Wallace for 7 games, the longest suspension in league history at that point for an incident not involving physical violence. While threatening a ref and bringing an ounce and a half of weed to the airport aren't that bad, get a load of Ruben Patterson, whose off-court issues were without a doubt the most shocking of all. Dubbed the Kobe stopper for his defensive prowess, Patterson's contributions on the court are far overshadowed by his personal life. In 2001, he pled guilty to attempted rape of his family's nanny, earning 15 days in jail and a spot on the registered sex offender list. Only 15 days in jail is absurd. But fear not, the lunatic would be met by karma, and by karma I mean Zach Randolph's fist. In 2003, during a team practice, Randolph decided to punch Patterson square in the face, breaking his eye socket. Reports from the locker room suggested that Randolph had gotten pissed off at Patterson's bullying tactics, particularly toward younger players, so he decided to mollywop the dude. Big ups to Zach for that, fuck that guy. But the incident turned practice into a TMZ headline and further solidified the Blazers' reputation as the NBA's dysfunction junction. Even role players couldn't escape the drama. Quintel Woods, a young forward with untapped potential, quickly became a lightning rod for controversy. In one bizarre incident, Woods was pulled over for speeding and handed the cop his basketball trading card instead of his driver's license. That's kind of funny, but things took a darker turn in 2004 when he was found to be involved in a dogfighting ring, eventually pleading guilty to animal abuse and cementing his exit from the NBA. The team dynamic was a ticking time bomb, but despite all the off-court chaos, the Blazers somehow remained competitive for a brief stretch. They managed to win 50 games multiple times and consistently made it to the playoffs. Although, by 2003, the cracks were too big to ignore. Fans once proud of their team began booing their players at home games. Attendance at the Rose Garden plummeted, and the Jailblazers nickname was no longer just a joke, it was their identity. Realizing the team's reputation was beyond saving, the front office decided it was time for a full rebuild. Over the next few years, Sabonis and Pippen retired, then players like Wallace, Wells, and Patterson were traded, signaling the start of rebuilding their team and reputation. The franchise went through a painful rebranding process, but eventually emerged with high-character players like Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge, paving the way for a new era. The Jailblazers era is now remembered as a cautionary tale of what happens when talent outweighs accountability. While the on-court product occasionally dazzled, the off-court antics left a stain on the franchise that took years to erase. That's all for this one. Big shout out to the Goobers, Nolan Fincher, Sheesh, Bray Thompson, HTL, Quinn Murphy, and MadeZio2. I really appreciate y'all. Also, I added a newer, cheaper membership level called Dudes for those of you who just want to say in what videos I make. If that interests you, you can go ahead and click the join button. Thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed. Bye, dude.